libertarianism is pro-immigration, pro-market, pro-trade.
More competitive, less centralized. Not military confrontations, but peaceful interaction.
The war on drugs has been actually an unmitigated disaster.
To Matthew's point, I do believe that there's actually a government does have a means to create markets where there's no markets there. I think you can use governments to write the rules of the roads, particularly when you're looking at new technologies and all these things that are happening, and provide a framework in which the market can work. Because we know what happens when markets don't work is that the government has to come in and clean all of it up. And it costs a significant amount of, it costs far more at the end to clean it up than we could have written rules at the beginning of the road to make sure it goes forward.
Is that it? There you go. Okay. All right, we'll proceed.
Right, yeah, I want to state emphatically that I don't believe the legalization of heroin and meth is a threat to the existence of the United States. I don't, now, maybe one day you can imagine a drug that potentially would, but that's not my position. I'm also of the opinion that a lot of the horrors that David highlighted are actually a direct result of prohibition. If you're worried about crime, and there is a lot of crime associated with drugs, but it's precisely because it's illegal. When was the last time Budweiser and Coors had a shootout over their brewery, right? In legal markets, you have courts. You have problems with each other. You go to court. You don't pull out guns. I'm happy to press pause and to zoom out, but I see a country that has spent more than $1 trillion on the war on drugs, that conducts dozens of SWAT raids every day, and has the highest incarceration rate in the world. So I'll press play with legalization assumed and think the world won't be perfect, but it'll probably be better. I want to conclude by pointing out that it's not true to claim that our current war on drugs has anything to do with harm. The substances that are prohibited, the motivation was not anything to do with harm. And one of the best examples of this, I think, is a quote from a former Nixon counsel, some of you will know, John Ehrlichman, who gave an interview with Harper's where he said bluntly, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities." I'm not saying that David, of course, adheres to all of that, but we should be aware that when we're talking about prohibited substances, harm is very rarely the reason that people are going for it. There's a whole book to be written on the history of drug prohibition and race, but that will be for another time.
Thank you. All right, now we are going to proceed to our second prompt, and we'll start with Ryan first, move on to Matthew, and then to David. All right, in that order, and you'll all be given 3 minutes each to address the prompt. So here's the prompt. What conception of equality best fits the United States? For example, equal opportunity, equal resources, equal treatment, etc., and why? Starting with Mr. Ryan, 3 minutes.
So I'll start with what the Pledge of Allegiance says. Liberty and justice for all. I'd like to emphasize the all part. As I mentioned in my opening statement, America is an idea. And because it's an idea, it means that it's something we continually work towards. I'll make an important distinction right now. This is that America was never founded on providing equal rights to all citizens. But we as a society believe that it is an important value. And as such, we've worked towards making that and enshrining that in the way that we move forward. And yes, we've made progress. We have universal suffrage. Civil rights we moved a lot farther than we should. We're not where we should be, but we've moved a lot further because of the civil rights movement. And worker rights across this last century have been, just to name a few. But there is lots of work to be done. For example, we need to make drastic reforms to our criminal justice system with a particular focus on prosecution of drug-related and nonviolent offenses. I also think it's a huge problem that our good social outcomes are very dependent. Our good social outcomes, particularly when you look at education and employment, are drastically dependent upon one's socioeconomic status. It's amazing that as a country that is as wealthy as we are, that we have such stark disparity between groups. For example, African American women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die due to complications during pregnancy. When all the studies have been looked at, the only factor that can actually be taken into account is the color of their skin. 3 to 4 more times more likely. That's insane. We are also sorting ourselves in this country in a way that is hearkening us back to the eras of segregation. Some states continue to pursue outrageous voter suppression laws that, whether intentional or not, disenfranchise large swaths of non-white populations. Our healthcare system is quickly becoming a bifurcated system that takes care of those who have funds and those who do not are stuck out in the cold. On that note, I also don't think it's crazy to argue that access to good, affordable healthcare is a human right. What this all sums up to is we must fight suppression at all levels of our society. It is all too prevalent throughout everything that we do that suppression finds its way in. That is why I said earlier that to reach the American dream, we have to create systems that treat people similarly, and if we don't, we're not even at a point of considering a level playing field.
Thank you. Matthew?
Yeah, I'll begin by pointing out that there is a tension between liberty and equality of outcome, opportunity, and condition. If you are looking for a political ideology that will redistribute resources equally, you should not go shopping at the Libertarian store. It's not to say, though, that Libertarians don't have a conception of equality. The best conception of equality that is best, not just for the US, but the rest of the world, is equality of equal treatment under law, that you should be treated the same in this country by the polity, regardless of your income, your race, your religion. Sadly, I think Ryan would probably agree that the law is not always applied equally in this country to every group, and that's something I think we agree on. I do want to point out, though, that it's inequality per se, especially when it comes to income inequality, is not axiomatically a bad thing. A country that gets that throws off a dictator and opens up markets will probably see an increase in inequality in the short term, and that's probably a sign of good things happening. If you look at the Gini index, which measures countries' inequality, I spent today going to the CIA World Factbook, which has some rankings on this that some people can quibble with. You'll see that the United States is about as equal or unequal as Thailand and Peru. And then you look at a country like Norway, which is comparatively very egalitarian, and it's very similar to Iceland and Germany. But it's also very similar to Belarus and Moldova. The Belarus, of course, being an authoritarian dictatorship. You can't look at a country's degree of inequality and come to many conclusions about whether it's a just society, whether it's a safe society, or politically stable. I suppose it's worth also mentioning that inequality will always be a feature of life just because of nature. I will never be an NBA basketball player. I was very fortunate that I was born to parents who were married and educated in a safe and wealthy country. It's unclear to me what kind of policies could be put in place to get rid of luck and happenstance. There will always be some degrees of inequality. I will finish by recommending a book written by my former colleague, Brink Lindsay, who examined inequality and came to an interesting conclusion, namely that a lot of the inequality we see when it comes to income can be attributed to the failings of a lot of our education systems that are not preparing us for 21st century economies. There really is a stratification when it comes to American class that should worry all of us. But I'll finish on that note.
Thank you. And finally, David.
So what conception of equality best fits the United States of America? The short answer, I think, is equal rights under the law with some degree of equality of opportunity. Allow me to explain. Equal rights, that's the easy part, right? The Declaration of Independence says all men, which means all human beings, regardless of race, sex, religion, you name it. Each and every one of us is created equal, and we're all endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights lists other rights. All Americans possess the same rights. So no gay rights, no women's rights, no black rights. There are core natural rights and civic rights, and everyone has them. And if they're being denied to you, it's a concern regardless of your skin color, your sexual orientation, your you name it. Now, we also want equality in the enforcement of the law. It's right there in the 14th Amendment. You want the laws to be colorblind. Now, the laws will make certain reasonable distinctions, for example, between minors and adults, which I know sucks for those of you who want to buy booze here on campus, but that's the way it is. But the law is not allowed to arbitrarily or unjustly discriminate against or in favor of any group of citizens, either by giving some special privileges to some or by refusing to enforce laws against others. The goal, as James Madison very, very nicely put it, is equal laws protecting equal rights. I think we'll all agree on this one. Where things get complicated is when you turn to equality of opportunity. Without a doubt, the most cherished term in America's political lexicon, but also the most elastic one. You see, the problem when you talk about equality of opportunity is that it blends together two distinct ideas. On the one hand, the availability of opportunities, and then on the other, the capacity of people to seize these opportunities. So I'm a conservative, and I support reasonable anti-discrimination laws in the private sector that promise all Americans an equal opportunity to apply for any particular job or desirable position. I am, however, very, very suspicious of the argument made by our liberal friends that the only way you know you've eliminated discrimination is if all groups are proportionally represented in all realms of life. You see, for liberals, there's a tendency to say that equality of results for groups is the measure of equality of opportunity. I firmly reject the idea that America should be engineered so that we find, 5.6% Asians in all realms. Such quotas are incompatible with the free society. Now, as a conservative, however, I am very sympathetic to the argument made by our liberal friends that life isn't fair, and that we're all born into vastly different circumstances that decisively shape our ability to compete for available opportunities. You guys know the story about the guy who was born on third base but thinks that he hit a triple? Well, I'm also concerned about the kid who was born with no shoes and no baseball bat. I think liberals go too far in trying to equalize life chances, but I still favor, as a conservative, measures to provide a threshold of opportunity for all American children, regardless of the circumstances under which they're born.
Thank you. Now we'll allow 2 minutes for rebuttal, starting with Ryan.
So I think we can all up here agree that the rule of law is probably the main driving component to make sure that there is equality for all in the United States. I think we all agree with that. I think we do probably differ in how that is actually practically done in the United States. And what as a progressive, what I would say is that, to Matthew's point, yeah, there is inequality. There's always going to be inequality in the world moving forward. But particularly in this country, there are systematic roadblocks that have been put up because of historical and cultural norms over the course of our country that have pushed specific groups to be disenfranchised, both from the economic system, from the voting system, from society in general. And our goal is to make sure that that, one, doesn't happen anymore, two, that we can reverse it in some form or another, and three, that we can move forward as a society in a way that everybody has at least some form of chance at the American dream. I think that's really where we're going for. I do not actually believe that we need to have quotas of specific populations across the board. I don't think any progressive would actually say that. I think what we really want to get at is that there are groups that have been disenfranchised that we need to talk for and we need to speak up for because they can't. And there are rules that have been written into our system that can be removed to help them forward.
Thank you. Matthew?
Yeah, I feel a little bit like a Swiss negotiator here. I'm trying to... so the first thing, so to Ryan's points first, I'll say, I think you raise interesting points that are worth taking seriously. I will, maybe it's my philosophy background, quibble with, healthcare right. I think not everything that's good and valuable is necessarily a right? But that's a discussion for the philosophy professor in his class later. I am curious about, Ryan, what's the end state and how will you be able to identify it? If it's not with a certain quota being fulfilled, if it's not with a certain degree of income, when does the Center for American Progress and Rights say, all right, mission accomplished? That would be interesting to unpack a little. David said a lot that I agree with. I would just say that I think I need to do probably a better job at this, but the Constitution, of course, wasn't written in a vacuum, and we don't operate in a society in a vacuum, and we should be cognizant of the history that post the 14th Amendment, there continued to be, of course, not any news to you, of course, the widespread discrimination and persecution of many people in this country. And that's more a point, I suppose, about persuasiveness than fact, but it's something that I certainly try and take more seriously going forward.
You have another minute if you want to.
Another minute? Oh, okay.
It